bolted from the hotel lobby toward the car, running past the security guards and police, and the crowd started to rush toward her. Michael told me she just started pushing people aside, knocking them left and right until she made it to the car. And then, miraculously, people stood back and left her alone. She grabbed little Gary and carried him in her arms back to the lobby, kissing and hugging him. And thankfully, the crowd let her pass. I didn't like the idea of crowds rushing at Nippy, or of her just wandering into them. But she was just excited to see little Gary, and in the end, everybody was safe. Even so, you can bet I gave John a piece of my mind when I heard this story. You better keep an eye on her, I told him. It didn't matter where Nippy went now. Everybody recognized her and wanted to come up to her. Once, when she and I had just flown back to New York together, we found out that the car that was supposed to pick her up had gone to the wrong airport. We had no car, no driver, no security, and it was a summer Friday, so JFK Airport was jammed with all kinds of people trying to get taxi cabs. Nippy's attorney and friend Tony Chambers was with us too, and while Tony was on the phone trying to get a limo, people started circling. There was no way we could stand there and wait. Nippy was about to be swarmed. So we picked up our bags and hurried out toward the taxi area, and a man walked up and said, "You need a car." He seemed to be the only person in the airport who had no idea who Nippy was, so we just looked at each other, and Nippy started laughing. "Yes, we do," she said. "Let's go." We followed the man through the crowds, past the taxi stand and into the parking lot. And there was his car, a beat-up Toyota something or other, with primer on the doors. We threw our bags into his trunk and piled in. As we rode off down the highway in that ratty old Toyota, Nippy seemed to love it. She cranked down the window and stuck her head out, enjoying the fact that just for a moment she could be plain old Nippy rather than the famous Whitney Houston. When we rolled up to a stoplight, a couple of girls were sitting in the car next to us. One of them shrieked, "That's Whitney Houston," and the other said, "Don't be stupid. Whitney Houston would never be riding in a car like that." No matter how famous she got, Nippy still loved the same old simple things she always had. She loved creamsicles, and if someone tried to bring her some kind of fancy sorbet with fruit, she'd say, "No, I just want a creamsicle." People would walk by this beautiful woman in jeans and a jacket, eating a creamsicle, and think, "She looks just like Whitney Houston." Nippy always wanted to be just one of the girls, but it got harder the more famous she became. After a while, she started separating out her public self from her private one. She'd say, "I'm tired, it's time for me to put Nippy to bed." Or when she had to perform, she'd say, "Okay, it's time for me to go be Whitney Houston." It was just one of the ways she dealt with the craziness of fame. Being a performer on the road is not easy. You have to know what you're out there for, the reason why you're doing it. A lot of people get lost in the whirlwind and get wrapped up in people who aren't good for them. You have to carefully choose the kind of company you keep, because it can get wild out there on the road, and it's easy to get caught up in it. I know, because I saw a little bit of everything when I was on the road all those years. I always tried to keep my head about me, because I was aware of having 3 kids and wanting to be an example for them. Not that I was a goody two-shoes, because I wasn't, but I tried to keep things under control, which was sometimes easier said than done. Now, with Nippy spending so much time on the road and only sharing pieces of it with me, I didn't have the full picture of how she was handling it all. Pretty soon, I got a hint from someone I didn't expect, Robin Crawford. One afternoon in the late 1980s, Robin came to visit me. I was surprised, since she and I never said much to each other, and I always tried to stay out of whatever was going on between her and my daughter. But Robin came to me because she was worried about Nippy. She told me that Nippy was using drugs, which was news to me. I had no idea about anything like that. Robin said that both she and Nippy were doing it on occasion, but that Nippy likes it a little too much. Apparently, if they had it in the house, Robin could do some and stop, but Nippy would keep on doing it until everything was gone. Now, I might not have liked certain things about Robin, but I will say this. She cared a great deal for Nippy, and she wanted to protect her. Nobody had the courage to come tell me that Nippy was getting into something that was bad for her. Nobody except Robin. She didn't have any kind of relationship with me, but she still came to me in person to try to help Nippy. I always respected Robin for that. After that conversation with Robin, I asked Nippy about using drugs. "Oh, Mommy," she said, "you don't need to worry about any of that." She just brushed off my concerns, saying she was fine and that Robin was overreacting. Much as I wanted to press the issue further, I didn't have much choice but to accept what she was saying. At that point, she was doing everything she was supposed to be doing. Touring, recording, making appearances, and everything else. And whenever I talked to her, she seemed to be fine. I didn't have any proof that anything was wrong, and without proof I couldn't push the issue with Nippy, since all she would do is deny it. I had checked in on her and made my concerns known. What else could I do? Much later, I would find out that John was worried about Nippy during this time too. As he watched Nippy's fame grow and saw her dealing with all the pressure of touring and being responsible for the livelihoods of dozens, if not hundreds of people, he began to wonder if she had the strength to handle it all. He knew Gary and Michael were struggling with drug use too, but as he told one family friend, "You know, the one I'm really worried about is Nippy. If she has to meet some real crisis or disappointment, I'm worried she won't survive it, because she's never had to." And John had a good point. He and I had done such a good job of protecting her that Nippy had never faced any real trauma in her life up to then. Proud as I was of the life we'd given her, with this instant surge of fame she was experiencing, I couldn't help but worry about what might happen whenever she finally did face some kind of hardship. I just hoped she would come to me if she needed my help. But there was one other thing that happened during this time period. One time when Nippy did come to me, and I pushed her away. It's one of the few moments in my life I truly regret. I was scheduled to do a concert in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Nippy had asked if she could come along. She was already a star by this time, but she wanted to come sing background for me, just like we'd done for so many years in the New York clubs. She didn't want to take over the show or anything. She just wanted to support me up on stage. People went crazy, of course, even though she was just backing me up. So when the next song was a gospel number called "Lead Me, Guide Me," I asked Nippy to step forward and sing the lead. She smiled and did as I asked, and I'm telling you, that whole place just about turned inside out. People were whooping and clapping and waving their hands around like they were in church. The spirit was there that night, it really was. This wasn't the magic of Whitney Houston. It was the magic of a mom and her little girl up on stage, singing the songs of faith we loved. The whole evening was so magical that it still pains me to think about what I did that night. Ever since she was a little girl, Nippy sometimes liked to crawl into bed and sleep with me. She did that in our hotel that night, too. But Nippy had developed a terrible habit of grinding her teeth when she slept, and she was doing it so loud that it was keeping me awake. I poked her and said, "Nippy, go sleep in your own bed." She said, "Mommy, I want to stay here." I said, "No, baby, you gotta go, because I can't get any sleep with that noise." So off she went, shuffling out just as sad as could be. I'm sure I hurt her feelings that night, and if I could take it back, I would. But life doesn't work that way. Nippy kept on performing, and as her fame grew, she started to try to do some good with it. In the summer of 1988, she sang at a benefit concert at Madison Square Garden that raised a lot of money for the United Negro College Fund. And that June, she performed in London at a big tribute concert for Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday. Mandela was still imprisoned in South Africa at the time, and apartheid was still in force. South Africa was a touchy subject then, and the organizers of the birthday tribute were having a hard time convincing artists to perform. Nobody wanted to agree to do it until others had agreed to do it first, because everybody seemed scared of some kind of backlash. Nippy didn't hesitate, though. As soon as the organizers asked her to perform, she said yes. There was nothing that could hold her back from honoring Mandela, whom she admired so much for his courage. She wasn't afraid, and I was proud of her for that. But it was the following year that she did something that made me even more proud. Nippy had always cared about the underdog, about people who didn't have as much as she did. I saw it when she was a child, when I had to tell her not to give all of her stuff away to the other kids. She just had a very tender heart when it came to people who were less fortunate. So as soon as she started making some real money, she put it to use trying to help others. Most of her charity work and gifts weren't publicized. That's the way she wanted it. But she gave of her time and money to organizations like the NAACP, the Barbara Davis Center for Childhood Diabetes, the United Negro College Fund, the Red Cross, and many more local charities than I could possibly name. Nippy had such a strong conscience that even when she was modeling as a teenager, she refused to work for agencies that did business with South Africa. She understood how fortunate she was, and she felt a duty to give back. By the late 80s, she was getting hundreds of requests to do benefit performances. She tried to do as many as she could, but it was just getting out of hand. People didn't realize that when you do a benefit, even if you donate your services, there are still heavy costs. If Nippy wasn't on tour, she'd have to bring back the band and the singers for special rehearsals. Professional musicians and background singers get paid for their rehearsal time, of course, and then she'd also have to rent rehearsal space, pay for everybody's transportation and hotel, per diems, and on and on. In the end, it could cost several $100,000 just to do a single benefit. Nippy knew there had to be a better way to put that money to use. So in 1989, she started her own nonprofit, the Whitney Houston Foundation for Children, with a focus on kids who were homeless or had cancer or HIV. She asked if I would serve as president and chairman of the board, and I gladly accepted. And then she hired Tony Chambers as the executive director. She wanted all the money that came in to go straight to the kids, so she underwrote the entire cost of the foundation, all the expenses for salaries, office supplies, and everything else, herself. From day one, Nippy was determined there would never be a question about how money was spent or where donations went. When anybody asked about her foundation, she'd say with pride, "My stuff is taken care of." Nippy's foundation did amazing work. We organized a youth leadership program in Washington, D.C. for teen-focused nonprofits, from 4-H clubs to suicide prevention hotlines. More than 100 kids came from all over America to D.C. for a week. All kinds of kids, some physically challenged, some confined to wheelchairs, some who were hearing impaired, black kids, white kids, Asian and Hispanic kids. For that week, they were able to meet people they'd never have gotten to meet otherwise, and bond with those who might have shunned them. They taught and learned from each other, and then took some of the ideas they learned back to their own communities. I was so proud of that project, and so proud of my daughter and her foundation. Nippy worked hard to contribute and do some good in the world, which is one reason it made me angry when people criticized her for stupid things. Some people just want to tear you down if they see you doing well, and people really went after Nippy. And the criticism she got most was all that mess about not being black enough. Now, all my life, I've appreciated good music and tried to make good music. When my generation came of age in the 50s and 60s, we aimed to spread out and be good at whatever we did, not just put ourselves in a little box the way generations before might have done. And that's what I tried to teach Nippy. My baby could sing anything. Why should she limit herself to a certain type of approved music? She sang songs she felt strongly about, and she sang them beautifully. I never could figure out how someone could criticize that. It started at the 1986 MTV Video Music Awards, but it sure didn't end there. The worst was the night of the 1989 Soul Train Awards, when Nippy was announced as a nominee for Best Female R&B Single for Where Do Broken Hearts Go. A few people started booing, and up in the balcony someone started yelling, "Whitey, Whitey," like it was something clever. This was just a bunch of kids trying to be smart and get everybody's attention, but it really hurt her feelings, all the more because she didn't deserve it. Nippy was never trying to be white. She just wanted to sing, to share her God-given talent and be herself. If they didn't like it that she didn't take off her clothes and shake her ass and all that mess, well, that was their problem. By the end of the night, though, she had won so many awards that she received a standing ovation, a fitting end to what was ultimately a difficult evening. Nippy was strong in some ways, but that same sensitivity to criticism that had bothered her when she was little never went away. This was exactly the kind of thing I had feared back when I told her I didn't want her going into the music business. I knew that she would suffer, and although I tried to counsel her just to ignore people or even tell them off, she couldn't do it. She just got her feelings hurt, as I had known she would. And as her mother, well, I was pissed off. After the show, when Nippy was still upset, I just held her and told her, "Baby, you're going to be all right. Those people don't know no better. If they knew better, they'd do better." The heckling hurt her, but in public she handled it pretty well, mostly ignoring it except for making a couple of statements. When one writer for Essence magazine asked her about the perception that she wasn't black enough, her response was perfect. "What's black?" she shot back. "I've been trying to figure this out since I've been in the business. I don't know how to sing black, and I don't know how to sing white either. I know how to sing. Music is not a color to me, it's an art." Chapter 10. Welcome Home Heroes. The 1989 Soul Train Awards show was significant for Nippy for more than just the booing. That was also the evening she met Bobby Brown. I didn't know much about Bobby before that night, although I had seen him perform. I knew he had a bad boy reputation, but the first time I met him, he was absolutely respectful to me. And in the beginning, when I saw him and Nippy together, their relationship just seemed like one of those schoolboy, I'll carry your books home kind of things. They seemed smitten, like high school sweethearts. Over the years, Nippy's name had been connected with a few different guys, and though she never really shared details with me, I always assumed that nothing was too serious, because she rarely talked about marriage or anything like that. Eddie Murphy, Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Randall Cunningham and the handsome actor Blair Underwood all went out with her at one time or another. I'm not sure which of them were more than friends. Eddie says now that's all he and Nippy were, though a lot of people don't believe him, but I think it's the truth. Nippy and Eddie seemed to have a real connection. For one thing, Nippy was funny. She had grown up in a house where everybody was joking and laughing all the time, and she could cut up with the best of them. There were times when Nippy would have you laughing so hard you were crying, and I think Eddie appreciated that. One night I saw them sitting together at a record listening party, surrounded by photographers. As the flash bulbs popped all around them, they just sat there laughing and talking to each other like they didn't even notice. And I do know that Eddie once gave Nippy a gorgeous ring, though it wasn't an engagement ring. Now Randall Cunningham, I believe he did want to marry her. He just loved Nippy to death. They had a few dates right around the time her debut album was released, and they saw each other a few more times after that. I liked Randall, and I don't know whatever happened with them. Maybe she was so tied up with her music and he was so busy playing football that they just didn't have time for a relationship. There really wasn't anyone who just swept Nippy up until Bobby came along. One of the first things I realized about Bobby was how different he and Nippy were. I didn't think he was a bad guy, but it was clear that he and Nippy had very different personalities, and his family life didn't seem much like ours either. And even back then, he couldn't seem to stay out of trouble. I'll be honest, I tried to tell Nippy from the beginning that I didn't think Bobby was good for her. We didn't have a big confrontation about it, but I brought it up a few times, and I could tell that she didn't appreciate hearing about my disapproval. She wanted to be with him, so I decided to let it go. After all, my sisters tried to tell me not to get together with John Huston, too, and you see how much I listened to that. Well, Nippy was the same way. She loved who she loved, and when she made up her mind that Bobby was the one for her, nobody could tell her any different. Throughout most of 1990, Nippy was working on her third album, I'm Your Baby Tonight. Clive Davis had always been the one to choose the songs for her records, but this time around, she wanted to have more of a say herself. Nippy would be the first person to defend Clive and his choice of songs on those first two albums. She loved all the songs and didn't feel like there was anything wrong with them. But at the same time, she had been hurt by those young black people booing and calling her Whitey, and by the black critics who accused her of turning her back on black audiences. Clive agreed with the slight change in direction, so for I'm Your Baby Tonight, he and Nippy brought in Luther Vandross and a team of Babyface and L.A. Reid as producers, aiming for a more urban feel to the songs, a little R&B mixed in with the pop. When it came out, I'm Your Baby Tonight didn't sell as well as the first two albums, but it did quiet some of Nippy's critics anyway. And of course, a Whitney Houston album that didn't sell as well was still huge by anybody else's standard, becoming the #1 R&B record of 1991 and selling 8 million copies. 2 months after I'm Your Baby Tonight was released, in January 1991, Nippy was scheduled to perform the Star-Spangled Banner at the Super Bowl. This was a big honor, and she was excited to do it. But the week before the game, the organizers asked her to make a safety tape, which is an advanced recording of the song. This was standard practice and insurance in case Nippy lost her voice or something else happened with the broadcast. They also needed the tape because there was going to be a fighter jet flyover during the song, and they needed to time the flyover to her hitting a particular spot in the song. But after she recorded the song and the people at the NFL heard it, they were not happy. Oh, no, they told us. This is too jazzy. She needs to do it straighter. Nippy hadn't done the typical white bread rendering that most performers did, and those conservative NFL folks just weren't ready for that. That was when John stepped up and told them, "No, this is the way Whitney is going to sing the song. If you want her to sing it, this is it." He wouldn't back down, and the NFL people finally agreed to let her sing the song her way. The day of the Super Bowl, I had hoped to be in the stadium, but I couldn't make it to Tampa, as I had shattered my ankle and it wasn't healing well. I had broken it in such a silly way. Luther Vandross had sent flowers to me at home, and as I was carrying them to my apartment, I caught my heel between the elevator and the floor and went down hard. It was just one little accidental moment, but it would lead to surgery and pins and screws and years of pain. And right then, it meant I couldn't go see Nippy perform live at the Super Bowl. I had promised her I would be there, but I'd had to call and tell her it just wasn't possible. "Don't worry," I told her. "You know what to do, and I'll be watching you." I sat on my sofa at home and watched, and though I knew as well as anyone what Nippy could do, even I was amazed at that performance. In all the days of my life, I was never so proud as when I saw my baby up there singing the national anthem with such power that the whole world could have probably heard it. The producers had wanted her to lip-sync it, but Nippy was like me. She couldn't do it. She couldn't keep time with a song unless she was really singing it. And at the Super Bowl, you could tell looking at her that she was singing the whole time. When she hit that final note, and then the jets flew overhead, I can't imagine there was a dry eye in that stadium. Afterward, Nippy called me and said, "Mommy, how was it? How did I do?" I said, "Are you kidding me? You were fantastic, baby. If you never do anything else in your life, you did that like it was supposed to be done." I wasn't the only one who felt that way. I heard later that after she sang, so many calls came into her office that the lines froze up. People flooded Arista with phone calls and messages asking for a copy of the recording, so Arista and BMG decided to release it as a single. And to everyone's surprise, it went right to the top 20 on the charts. This was during the First Gulf War, so patriotic feeling was running high, and Nippy and her foundation, the Whitney Houston Foundation for Children, Arista, and BMG, donated all their share of the proceeds, more than $1 million, to the American Red Cross Gulf Crisis Fund. Nippy wanted to do her part to support the American troops fighting in Desert Storm, so she began talking about going to the Middle East to make an appearance there. She had her management team contact military authorities to discuss the logistics and scheduling. She was planning to launch a world tour in support of I'm Your Baby Tonight in London, so she'd have to do it before then. The military officer on the call said, "Can we get off this phone? I want to call you back on a secure line." When he called back, he told Nippy's management, "If I were you, I wouldn't let her do it." Asked why, he replied, "Because of the war. Whitney Houston is an American treasure, and the risk of having her kidnapped or killed while abroad is just too high." Her manager tried to argue that Nippy always had security with her, but the officer interrupted to say, "You don't have security like the president has. And even with the Secret Service protecting him, if someone wants to kill the president and is ready to die doing it, he can. So believe me, Ms. Houston does not have enough security to protect her if someone wants to get to her." At that point, Nippy's team had to scramble and make some decisions. They consulted with more authorities in Washington, and again they were told don't let her go. Someone went to Washington and talked with the authorities about the touring, and again they were told she shouldn't go. You can't protect her. That's when they decided to postpone the European leg of her I'm Your Baby Tonight tour altogether. A lot of folks who were involved in scheduling Nippy's tour were disappointed, but I wasn't. I felt a lot better when I heard she wasn't going on either the tour or any visit to the Gulf just yet. Ever since John had become CEO of Nippy Inc., He seemed like a new man. He looked better, seemed healthier, and carried himself with more assurance. In many ways, his role as CEO seemed to be the answer he'd been looking for after his heart attack, giving him the sense of purpose that had been missing for him. He had put together a great management team for Nippy, and he was happy wheeling and dealing with industry big shots. The dreams he'd had since way back when he was pushing to manage the Drinkard Singers were finally coming true. Nippy Inc. had opened an office in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and John was there a lot of the time, so we didn't see each other all that much. And I was busy too, working with Nippy's foundation, directing the New Hope Choir, and doing my gigs in New York. I also was still doing background singing on records such as Bette Midler's Some People's Lives and Luther Vandross's The Power of Love. We didn't see each other as often as we used to, but I hadn't noticed any kind of change in the casual intimacy John and I had shared since we separated. Sometime in the winter of 1991, though, John started keeping his distance from me. I had a strange feeling that something was going on, and one day in February, when I was in the hospital because of complications with my ankle, I found out that I was right. John had filed for divorce. I was floored, surprised and sad and angry. We had shared so many wonderful years as a couple and as a family. I just couldn't believe John would throw all that away. I knew he'd been seeing someone, but I honestly never thought he would actually divorce me. I just couldn't imagine it. I knew that our children had long harbored hope that he and I would get back together, and I had let myself believe that it was not only possible, but even probable. Most people still didn't even realize we were separated. When we went on tour with Nippy, John and I shared a hotel room together, and we still spent some weekends together. For a while, at least, it had felt like we were dating again. I knew John better than anyone on this earth, and no one knew me better than he did. But ultimately, I guess I didn't know him as well as I'd thought. I had always believed we had an unspoken understanding that even if we lived apart, we would remain husband and wife. We would still always be the Houston family. When I received those divorce papers, though, that was the end of that. Laid up in the hospital, shocked at this new turn of events, I felt sad and angry. And, of course, when I looked back, I finally realized that the new air of confidence John was exuding wasn't just about his work. It was at least partly about the fact that he had gotten involved with a woman much younger than he was. Gary, Michael, and Nippy were just as shocked as I was. But the boys wouldn't take my side, and although it hurt, I couldn't really blame them. After all, the whole time they were growing up, John was always there for them. While I was out working and touring, trying to bring home enough money to pay the bills, he was at home being Mr. Mom. John was the one who took care of their scrapes and problems, and I was the disciplinarian who was so often away. It was no wonder they couldn't bring themselves to put blame on him. Now, Nippy was another story. She was angry. Bay later told me she was there when Nippy found out the news, and that Nippy called John right then and told him, "If you divorce my mother, you divorce me." Nippy must have been upset to say that, because she adored her father, and while I was comforted to know my daughter was taking up for me, I also knew that John was doing a good job as CEO of Nippy's company and that she needed him. Nippy clearly knew that too, because John stayed in his position. Ultimately, Nippy didn't pick sides between us. She was torn and didn't know what to do. But then again, none of us did. Frustrated as I was, deep down I didn't really want Nippy to stay mad at her father. No matter how angry or disappointed I was, it didn't make any sense to drive a wedge between John and my children,